When I received your email with the invitation to speak in front of you and talk how you could maximize your impact, I got a bit scared when I saw the list of speakers, because I thought, who am I to talk here? Because actually 20 years ago, when you spearheaded this kind of new business, I was 15 years old. I was more interested in watching football, Germany losing at that time in the EM. And I didn't know any architects, I think, at that time. And as you said before, I'm just another architect, and we just make 2% of the buildings in the world. So we're just part of a really, really small community. But then I thought, I really have to talk here because I have to make a confession to you, because actually I owe you a lot, because I worked for 5 years in various kind of international offices, and I learned a lot about what we talked in the morning about philosophy of architecture, nice design, experimenting with materials. I did small-scale installations like this in London. We did big buildings in Dubai, Australia, and all this. But after 5 years, I had the feeling I'm missing out on something. And that's when I moved to Berlin, opened my own practice, and that's why I have to confess I misused you. Because I decided I'd take part in big international competitions so I can get you to work with me for free. And I learned from you. Because that was something I never learned in all the other practices, never learned in university. So after doing a couple of competitions with you, working a couple of years now, I think for 5 years we know each other, I learned all this kind of doing all these diagrams, like thinking in like ecology systems, like how to apply that into buildings and all this. But thinking about all this kind of footprints, like thinking about sustainability also in a broader, more holistic sense, it came to my mind that actually the system that we're in is not sustainable at all. Because if we're talking about that we're building the icons, that this becomes things that people copy, we really have to think actually how we build that, or how we decide something becomes an icon. So that's just one example. That's a competition for the Grand Egyptian Museum in 2002. And that is the icon that was selected by a grand jury to be built. But you have to imagine that in this competition, around 1,600 teams submitted their design. And there was just one winning team. So, and if we think like, this is a big museum, so if we underestimate it, there must be at least 3 people, 3 architects working for 1 month for this competition in order to submit a real design, a good design. So if you multiply that by 1,575 offices, you come up with around 4,671 architects month or men month of work. Yeah? And if you look at this, this is around 10 architects working for their whole life. Yeah? So actually, we kind of like the way that we design, that we think about what is the best design, maybe a sustainable design or not, is not sustainable at all. And that's not one example. That is like just looking throughout history, through other competitions, and you see it's not unusual that hundreds and hundreds of teams taking part in this. And of course, at the same time, we having big problems. That is like showing a map of the world by the CO2 emissions, and you see most of the countries that we're talking about when we rise to 7 billion by 2030, like in 20 years, are even today not having any impact on the CO2 footprint. So that's why we suddenly will have this big rise. And our goals are actually to reduce CO2 to 0 by 2050 in order to keep climate change in boundaries. And if you look at the kind of countries, this is the world map scaled by CO2 reductions. You see some of the countries you don't see at all, like the US. Where is the US or South America there? And when we talked about India, for instance, you talked about all the cities that are growing, but at the same time, within the next 15 years, India will have 70 new cities which will be at least the size of Stuttgart. Completely new cities that are not existing today. So we have to build 70 times Stuttgart. How do we do that? And the other thing is, if you look at the disaster rates in the world, it's going up due to climate change. This is like kind of like potential growth of disasters that happens. This is the last disaster that probably we all remember, when Japan was hit by this triple disaster, where around 50,000 people were affected and 500,000 people were homeless. Yeah? We're not only thinking of we have to increase or build new cities, but because of the environment, a lot of existing cities get destroyed. And that was 2003 here in Europe, which was also a disaster because 40,000 people died because of a heat wave. That's the same amount of the people that were affected in Japan. And by 2050, that will be the usual summer that Europe is facing. That will not be an exception anymore, that will not be a peak, that will be the usual summer that we have to deal with. So, but a lot can happen in 20 years. Of course, maybe some football teams don't get better and they always lose. But if we think 20 years back, there was the first graphical web browser published at that time. So exactly when you started your company, Microsoft had a browser, which at that time didn't even have a back button, but it was the first time, so that was actually the birth of the internet as we know it. And if you see like what happened in 20 years, all these businesses that really got kind of transformed by the internet, by this new medium that we have. For instance, like Wikipedia is just 10 years old. It completely killed a whole business of lexica. Bertelsmann, Encyclopedia Britannica. Every family had like these big books and was spending a lot of money on them. They were making millions. Yeah? They're gone. This is the 2,500 best or most clicked entries of the English Wikipedia. Yeah, imagine having this at home. But the English Wikipedia has around 3 million entries. So if you want to have all the knowledge in your home, that would be the amount of books that you needed. This is 1,500 books that you can carry around with you. Yeah, you can easily move now. You don't need to be at one place. And what happened in recent years, it really changed some countries. There were some people that believed in philosophy, that wanted to maybe educate people, tell them what they should do, but people start not allowing that anymore. They are better connected and they're writing against this. And my guess is if we stay as architects and planners the same way we're doing now, we will be the next one that will be hit by this net moment, by this internet moment. And cities will be the next one that will be hit by this internet moment. So the question is, if we want to move on, or how can we contribute? I mean, how can I contribute to your question? I think how I can contribute to tell you my point of view, and I'm kind of counting myself to the digital natives. This is the new generation that was born actually with digital technologies. So we don't make any distinction between our physical and our virtual reality. So we have the same kind of like we're using Facebook or other things, the same way we're using our physical privacy or our physical life. And we hate single-use devices. We don't have watches anymore because they can do just one thing. And just want to see from this perspective, I think there's a lot of good news as well that I would like to share with you. Because, for instance, now you can get education for free. So you can go on the website, you can see the MIT Open courseware, and you can get the best physics professor for free. That for like 10 years, 20 years ago, you would have paid $50,000 a year. And you have to imagine that at the moment, just 1% of the world population has a high school education or university education. So this can help us just to raise this number dramatically. That was the university that I was studying in London. And you see, these are like fortresses. You have to afford to go there. You have to pay money. You have to listen to one person that tells you that is the right way and that is what you have to do. And education turned into something like this. It's a big bazaar. You just go out there on the internet and you have to learn how to shop because sometimes the information is not correct. Sometimes you're getting good bargains, sometimes not. And this is what we have to learn. But there's a lot of private and also public institutions that's spreading more and more valuable knowledge in the internet. For sure, many of you know the TED Talks. And today, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you just need an internet access in order to get a proper education and communicate with other people. And the technology, what we have on the hands, in 1992, the weather forecast at that time at the ETH was done with a supercomputer that had 1.2 gigaflops. This is what we have today in our iPhone. So we have all supercomputers in our pockets. At that time, the fastest computer was of the NSA, the National Security Agency in the US. So George Bush had access to this computer, which had 2 terabytes of data storage. So that's what every computer today has. And we have a new oil, actually. Data is a new oil that was pointed out by Balmer. It is like crude oil. We just have to understand how to refine it, which we at the moment don't know. But we have access to so many things. This is a map of Berlin, not drawing the streets, but looking at the people, at the users, what many of you were talking also about the bottom-up system. So this is Flickr and panorama images of people taken in the city. So this is, you know how people using the city, which streets they're using. And you can even look at this, you can say who are tourists and who are locals. You can do a lot of things with this data. And another thing which is really interesting when we talk about the growing population, one thing we have to point out as well, if we will have 7 billion or 7.5 billion people in 2020, we will have estimated amount of 5 billion internet users. Today we have 1 billion people connected to this worldwide service. We will have 5 billion. And there will not be only in the developed world, because all the countries that will be leapfrogging. Yeah? They will not use like old line telephones or something. People using mobile phones in slums because they're much cheaper. It's a much cheaper technology. And what can you do with all these people? Imagine all this knowledge that we can access. This is a university project called Folded. It's a project that looks at folding, how you call it, DNA structures, which until now was done by supercomputers. It's a university project that developed a game out of it and put it out in the public, and people could play it. And actually, they figured out that people are much, much better in solving the structures, and the best player of this game was actually a woman from Manchester who was working in office at the daytime and unfolding at night DNA structures. So, not a professor somewhere at MIT or Harvard. No, it was just someone working in office who was bored with their job. And imagine now we get 4 billion more people like this that could solve problems. And that's why I started co-founding a network called OpenSimSim 2 years ago for the Biennale. And we were just like looking at how could we actually engage with this? How can we bring open source? How can we bring crowdsourcing, all the things I was talking about, into architecture and the design process? There was a project at that time, and we did a lot of experiments also with Transsolar together. I just want to show you one that we did after the disaster in Japan. Actually, exactly 1 year ago, in June, we did Open Japan, which was a 72-hour work sprint over 10 cities all over the world. So we gathered people over the internet in 10 cities, and we told them, hey, let's work together and help the people in Japan to redesign their buildings or come up with new ideas what they could do there. And the idea was the following. It always started in Japan, people talking with the people that were affected, and like a charrette, or kind of like passing on a stick, it was then passed to India, to Chennai, to Moscow. People worked there. They passed it after 6 hours to Europe, to some cities in Europe. We passed it to New York and Kansas, and they passed it after 24 hours back to Japan. And we did it 3 days. And there was no authorship anymore to any of the project, any of the ideas, because it went through 250 people all over the world. There were designers, there were engineers, there were the guys from Transsolar in New York also participating in it. Can we have the sound?
But I cannot because I'm not there. So all I can do is like join to this event, and this event is so good.
To spread projects between different nodes around the world.
Hello.
Hi, could you please tell us a few words about fishermen?
one of the tragedies.
So I just wanted to show you a bit the atmosphere of this, because this was 250 people working non-profit for helping other people, and they were all happy afterwards. They didn't gain any money. So, and I think that is something that if you want to maximize your impact, you might want to engage. And I think the thing that you started here, that is amazing. I mean, but the problem is, I think you opened something very dangerous here, because actually you always wanted to have low impact and high comfort. So it means if you want to maximize your impact, you minimize your comfort, because that is something that you're not used to. This kind of conference is something that is new to you. But you did a great job. But I think the problem is you have to do it every year now. Because I think people will love it, and you have to do it over and over again. So I think, like, if we want to really engage, maximize our impact, we have to think about a more interactive, more social, and CO2 neutral city. And actually, as an advice to you, go back to your roots. You started developing programs as well. Why don't you go back? Why don't you develop programs that we as architects can use? You can reach much, much more people. Do programs, apps that actually users of buildings can do, because most of the time the building is not the problem, but how people actually use it. That is how in infrastructure a lot of problems are solved, by just giving more intelligence to the user, more knowledge. Don't educate them, just give them a better choice. And think about also this digital network, because the cities, the buildings you're building are actually for the next generation. They are for the digital natives. Thanks a lot.